Chapter 64. Later within the night, Celine set another flower down, right beside her deceased friend's memorial. She peered at the night sky, wondering if Xianxia had watched her encounter with Sir Vigos. Imagine all the freedom we could have had here. Your husband seemed to have woken up from his greedy state, although it is far too late now. But he seems to be a great father now, she smiled fondly as Draco rubbed against her arms. Should I enter the palace? Celine contemplated deeply. Entering the palace would mark her entrance into court politics. She knew that once she involved herself, there would be no going back. Celine did not want to break the peace and privacy of her personal life, nor did she want to inconvenience her family. I do want to meet Habibti though. Then, she shifted her focus on Draco, who was currently in the form of a cat. Her contemplative thoughts increased. It's so weird that familiars only exist for the nobles in the Xianxia Empire. Is there some type of event hidden from the history books I've read? How is it possible that you are mine? It was one of the many thoughts Akihiko had asked Celine during their walks together. She had never considered this aspect and was also curious to know what made the Xianxia special. Celine smiled affectionately and patted his soft fur. There were many thoughts coursing through Celine, and she already knew that her life would look very different in the near future. It was simply impossible to lead a peaceful life forever. A small flame erupted into a fierce explosion, burning through the dark night. Centered at the heart of the village, the villagers screamed in agony as they desperately cried for help. If the town didn't receive help soon, it would be engulfed in flames. However, it seemed as if the palace refused to offer help. At the same time, deep in the mountains, Draco heard the faint yells of the people and immediately nagged Celine to wake up. Celine smelled the smell of burning wood, and the ashy sky had begun to cover the forest too. Draco, Celine, and Zakai jumped into immediate action as they realized that the town was on fire. The screams of the townspeople could even be heard in their home, and the entire house was in a frenzy to gather resources. As the three arrived in the town, Celine felt an ominous presence. Where are the Emperor's men? She wondered in the back of her mind as she assessed the situation before her. Throughout the night, she gathered a group of men and extinguished the flames with Draco's water supply, and even put out the embers in the sky. Thankfully, the night wasn't windy and the fire did not spread far. The family tended the wounds of survivors and offered various resources to the villagers too. The fire hadn't seriously injured many of the dwellers or caused a state of disaster. Therefore, the situation was handled quickly. However, various cries of hatred rose up suddenly as the people began to recover. 1. It was the Emperor. The town began to wail. I saw the red dragon before the flames erupted. The Emperor is evil. He's abandoned us. I knew a foreign emperor would eventually turn his backs on us. Celine was surprised by their outrageous remarks, yet she couldn't reassure the people or calm the rumors down. The messengers who ran to the palace seeking help had never returned. Shouldn't the palace have noticed that their own people were struggling? How did Emperor Akihiko not see the flames? After strenuous hours of saving the small houses, Celine flew straight to Emperor Akihiko in her disheveled appearance. Her skin was stained and wet from delivering water, while her eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion. Emperor Akihiko was surprised to see Celine on his balcony. He had expected her presence, but didn't think she would arrive in the middle of the night. He frowned upon closer inspection, realizing that there was something wrong. He was surprised by the sinking feeling in his heart as his confusion turned into dread. Was he worried over someone for the first time in his life? Your Majesty. Her alarming eyes cut through Akihiko's thoughts, and he immediately rushed forward to greet Celine. Before he could ask if she was injured, Celine already jumped off of her familiar's back. I'm fine, but how come you did not hear the cries of your people outside of the castle walls? She was nearly out of breath and exhausted. She wanted to scorn Akihiko, but her eyes widened in shock at his response. What cries? He narrowed his eyes. Then, Celine realized that the entire palace was eerily quiet, and that the sounds of the wails couldn't be heard. An invisible veil had covered the palace, creating the illusion of a calm, serene night. The ashy fire could not be seen by the guards of the castle, and the palace continued to sleep through the chaos in the village. After thorough research, it was confirmed that black magic was used to initiate a fire, and that the bodies of the messengers were found in a nearby forest. I believe that this act was done to defame your highness Sir Vigos declared with knit eyebrows. He stood next to the emperor in his private quarters, too engrossed in his thoughts to greet Celine. They were to meet with a private audience soon, yet Celine was currently informing them of the events that had ensued after the incident. She still couldn't process that black magic existed in this realm, yet she was too exhausted to show any signs of shock. Celine also wasn't too surprised since familiars did exist in this world. The room was quiet for a long time, and the three adults were deep in thought until Sir Vigos finally spoke collectively. Black magic was used to initiate the fire, and someone planted random passerbyers to slander your highness. The culprit is most likely not a Christian, for it is plainly illogical to burn down half the capital just to tarnish your majesty's reputation. They would rule a land of ashes if they were to succeed. This person clearly does not know much about our country either, for they picked this specific night that wasn't windy. Any noble who has lived here long enough would know that fire does not spread easily at this time of year. The emperor's men who attacked the markets did not resemble your private army either, so the culprit is not within the court. However, the muscular men at the market were the stereotypical Christian soldiers Zionites would describe them as. The only person I know who practices black magic and may hold a grudge against your majesty is Xavia, the new queen of the Zionite Empire. Celine sucked in a breath after Sir Vigos' analysis. It makes sense. Xavia probably sent men to start all those rumors that claimed your highness was in love with her, and make the people believe that Akihiko is still loyal to the Zionites. After all, the townspeople think that your love for Xavia was so vast that you refused to take an empress. How can such an absurd rumor reach this country? While Vigos was deep in thought, the emperor remained silent and expressionless. It was impossible to know what he was thinking. Celine pushed harder. But what does Xavia want to gain from all this? Emperor Akihiko, who had remained silent as the two went back and forth, finally stood up. These are all speculations, and there are many black magic users in Xianxia too. I am also an enemy to many Christians because I only possess half of the Christian blood. A crazy man will burn the entire world just to sit on a throne, and we know that this is true. However, it is possible for lowly Christians to plot with Xavia. I don't know Xavia's motive, and perhaps I would know if my memories were intact, but I am sure she is the culprit. Along with my brother too. She is the reason for your memory loss. I am sure of it. Sir Vigos' eyes flashed with hate. Then, what is your next move? Emperor Akihiko. Celine asked carefully, noting how emotions may have clouded Sir Vigos' logic. We will go to war. Chapter 65. No, Celine immediately rejected the emperor's proposal. She looked at Sir Vigos, who bowed his head in agreement. She opened her mouth in shock. Are you both crazy? This country is not as developed as the Zionite Empire. They will crush this country. Even if you won the previous fight, it does not ensure your win. You underestimate Xianxia. Celine. Our men are stronger, and we also have allies. Sir Vigos tried to interrupt but was cut off by Celine. They have more familiars. You can't kill them all. However, it is not a secret that their empire has been weakened. Did you not notice the power of Zionite familiars have dwindled over time? Celine, our familiars make up the force of 2 armies while theirs make up 1. The emperor interjected sternly. Yes, but you haven't won the hearts of the people yet, so how will you command their sons to win a war for you? You must focus on internal affairs and winning the trust of your people first. The two stared at one another, intense pressure building between them. Celine didn't believe in war that shed unnecessary blood. Her previous life had been free of such a gruesome life. She couldn't accept that their decisions would result in thousands of fallen soldiers and grieving families. Victims, along with their loved ones, would be traumatized for a lifetime. Even if her current life normalized war and bloodshed, she didn't want to involve herself, although she knew there was no other way. She wanted to keep the peaceful life she had built over the past few years since she arrived in Xianxia. War is inevitable. An empire will strive for harmony, and oftentimes there will be war to achieve this goal. As an emperor, the first know what our people need, and my power is enough to defeat a weak country. I have done it once, I will do it again. His voice was filled with warning, and although he had interest in Celine, she had no right to criticize his reign. Celine also realized she couldn't openly criticize the emperor, and she bit her lip in response. I did not mean to offend your majesty. I apologize sincerely and hope you can forgive my humble self. She lowered her eyes in defeat, relieving the tense atmosphere immediately. In 2 days, I will gather the nobles and discuss military strategies and battle plans. Will you assist me? She raised her eyes again, and this time it wasn't Zayden or Akihiko asking her, it was the emperor commanding her. She bit her lip in disapproval. Yes, your majesty. I will return in 2 days. Celine packed a year's worth of necessities after a formal invitation had arrived, detailing her needed presents. There was no telling how long she would be gone for, so she decided to travel without bringing anyone, refusing the help of Hala. She had hastily prepared for her departure by training Zakai how to take care of the business. She also made time to spend her last moments with the family until the bittersweet parting day finally arrived. Ichika and Eiji were stuck to her legs, refusing to let her leave. At least leave Draco behind, Eiji whined until Ichika pulled his ear as punishment. Shut up, idiot. Are you saying that you will miss Draco more? Ichika hissed. No, Eiji whimpered. Celine only laughed and gently removed herself from their grasp, planting a soft kiss on each of the children's forehead. Eiji and Ichika blushed, their eyes sparkling upon her sweet touch. They didn't understand why Celine was leaving, and they were too young to know what the emperor wanted. You must behave and take care of each other since Draco won't be around too often anymore. Take care of your mother and Hella and don't annoy Zakai too much, okay? Then you must come back home as soon as you finish. Eiji tugged her simple dress. Celine's appearance was unreal, as if she was only a beautiful legend who would disappear and never return. She had purposefully hidden her features with layers of fabric, yet her mannerisms seemed to demand for respect. Home. The word rang repeatedly in her ear as she continued her farewell. You never know, she might return as the Empress, the mother joked lightly. But my home is here. Celine shook her head and smiled. I will return soon. Take care of yourselves. She hugged the woman who resembled her own mother, and the moment felt bittersweet. She felt tears threatening to leave her colored eyes. She desperately didn't want to leave this peaceful life. She wanted to watch the children grow, witness Sakai and Hala's wedding, and continue to build upon her business. She turned to Hala and embraced her tightly. Hala was already shaking, weeping as she clung to Celine desperately. Please stay safe, my lady. I am afraid you will be alone, and that the emperor will not treat you well. Zakai pulled her away, nodding his head with deep respect as they shared a knowing look. He was now the head of the family, who would take over the business on his own and protect the household. Celine trusted that Zakai would not disappoint her and continue his tasks well. After all, he had proven himself over the years. I have Draco. I will not be alone, Hala. Take care of your own body, and be sure to write me letters. Their parting lasted for a long time, for the family loved Celine dearly, and they did not know when she would return. However, they didn't doubt that she would return safely. Their last conversation was filled with promise and hope, just as a family would send their own child to war. Chapter 66. Celine was scheduled to reside in the palace for however long the emperor needed her assistance. As she journeyed towards the front gate of the majestic palace, she wondered what her life would look like in the near future. Draco was curled up on her lap in cat form as she stroked his soft fur. She watched him rest as they traveled with the escort. Her heart felt numb and unsettled. Celine had been given such a short amount of time to digest all of the events that had taken place, it felt unreal. She was walking on such an unknown path, and for the first time she truly didn't know what would happen. She was curious to know if Xavier was the true culprit, what Sir Vigo's child looked like, and she also wanted to see how Emperor Akihiko handled his court or political affairs. Hence, she looked up into the sky, to free herself from such tedious earthly thoughts. Her hair had returned to its original glory, and she had dressed like a noble Christian woman before her departure. She completely veiled herself, which was the sole reason she was denied entry into the palace, despite the invitation. Lady, the only woman we are supposed to welcome today is a beautiful maiden with silver hair and gold, purple eyes. They didn't spare a glance, and even the passerbyers eyed her suspiciously. The guards were eager to see the woman who matched the absurd description they were given, believing that the invitation in their hands was forged. How dare you disrespect the emperor's guest without politely ask? Then take off that veil, woman. The guard clicked his tongue and forcefully grabbed the fabric wrapped around her head. Celine's eyes glistened with fury as she imagined how cruel these guards were if they treated a seemingly weak woman like this. However, she did not retaliate and even allowed the guards to handle her roughly. She wanted to know how far the guards would go to hurt her. She held on to Draco, who squirmed in her arms and hissed at the soldiers. What would Akihiko do if he saw his own soldiers laying their hands on her? The fabric wrapped around Celine's head was tied together in a complicated manner, for she didn't want anyone to unveil her mask except for herself. Therefore, the guards struggled and continued to pull violently out of embarrassment, garnering the attention of the local townspeople. "Fuck, who are you, woman?" he yelled in frustration. The other guard left his post to join his fellow mate when the screeching sound of a dragon stopped them dead in their tracks, for this sound only belonged to one person. The Emperor's familiar who could breathe flames. The entire town grew silent as Red landed abruptly, and a gust of wind brushed against their skin and tangled their hair. They were horrified by Red's frightening appearance, yet mesmerized by his majestic beauty. Even Celine and Draco paused, wondering why Red chose to reveal himself in his most monstrous form. Their thoughts were shortly answered, for the Emperor himself was also flying on Red's back. He also appeared furious as he made his way towards the guards. With one slick motion, he twisted the guard's arm away and threw him to the ground near Red's tail. Red only grunted and sent the guard flying. The townspeople watched with amazement and terror as the guard was literally tossed like a ball into the forest. "Is this how your men treat special guests?" Celine questioned, further irritating the Emperor. His eyes seemed violent, and his aura screamed death. He was annoyed that Celine did not use her familiar to block the guard's assault, and even more furious that a man had dared to touch Celine. He whipped his head around towards the other guard who was groveling next to his feet. We didn't know. Sorry, how dare I? Please spare," he stuttered, unable to finish as the gate suddenly opened and new soldiers poured out to seize the guard. Sir Vigos himself arrived, and the townspeople widened their eyes and peered over at the mysterious woman who was special enough for the Emperor and his close aide to personally welcome her at the front gate. However, Celine kept her beauty hidden, leaving the crowd of civilians disappointed. "Not the greatest first impression for entering your palace. Did you really think I would want to live here after being treated like this?" Celine smirked and walked past the Emperor, whose eyes turned murderous as he glared at the ghostly, pale guard. The meetings were held continuously for several days, and during the time Sir Vigos and her had grown closer together. She felt as if his maturity had grown tenfold since their last encounter, and she was inspired by how wise and humble he had become. Together, the final plan had been formulated. Xavier was to be poisoned by Krastia's most deadly tea leaves. The tea's scent was a beautiful aroma, yet it would instantly kill a human once it went down their throat. This type of tea was renowned throughout the world, and there would be no mistaking that the leaves belonged to Krastia. The purpose was not to kill her. If they did accomplish this goal, then the war might be shorter. However, this action would certainly spark conflict and ignite war, which was exactly what the Emperor wanted. Because Celine was more involved with the tactical and weaponry aspect of the military, she barely remembered how they would accomplish the plan. She left it in the Emperor's hands to fulfill this assassination attempt, for she was busy engineering more effective arrows and swords, while listing the necessities for their long journey ahead. The men also didn't question Celine's knowledge, for they were too afraid to lift a finger in the presence of Draco, who currently posed as a dragon who was as monstrous as Red. If they dared to insult Celine, they might as well offend the Emperor, Red, his closest advisor, and this ferocious new dragon. Celine also kept her appearance well hidden, so the nobles really didn't have much prejudice to begin with. A dragon was the most respected being in their culture, and this mysterious woman had gained every man's respect by showcasing her familiar. She was finally able to rest after the plan to poison Xavier had been set out. She felt as if she had been suffocating the past few days as she entered the newly built bathhouse. The steam from the water filled the wooden bathhouse, and she sat leisurely, enjoying a moment of peace as the smell of bamboo trees filled the room. Celine had once again engrossed herself with work, and her input was especially important this time. She felt exhausted and the need to unwind herself. Celine had also eaten dinner with the Emperor quite frequently, which was a weird experience on its own. His hard appearance had softened during their time together, and she sometimes glimpsed Xaden in his actions, which made her smile unknowingly. Even then, she realized that Xaden had changed over time, and that he had also become a wise emperor striving to help his people, despite his own misfortunes. It made Celine wonder whether she had also changed. Was Celine incapable of personal change because she possessed the mind of an adult since she was born? It felt as if she had never mentally grown over the years. She had continued to remain steadfast and work towards her business goals, while also providing for people she considered family. Celine considered herself to be mentally strong. She had constantly taught others, but had she truly learned from them in return? Mind if I join? Celine was dumbfounded by the sudden intrusion. She could only stare at him blankly as the familiar voice belonged to the one and only Emperor of Krastia. The Emperor slowly strided in with only a small piece of cloth covering his privates. His tall, lean body had grown over time. He had multiple scars covering his stomach and chest, yet his face was still youthful and handsome. "What are you doing here?" she asked bluntly, unfazed by the sudden situation. Akihiko had heard that Celine was visiting the bathhouse that he had designed himself. He didn't think he would enter, yet he just wanted to see her face after working for a long time. Even now he was embarrassed and guilty, but the mist covered most of their bodies, including his red ears. In fact, their faces were both flushed, although one wouldn't be able to tell if it was from the steam rising from the hot water. "I also wanted to wash myself and relax," he replied as calmly as he could. "It is a big bathhouse." Akihiko was slightly taken aback by her indifferent expression, especially since there was another naked man walking towards her. It was as if this situation was natural for her, and a naked man was nothing new. Celine simply raised her eyebrows in response. "Are you not scared?" he frowned, disappointed by her reaction. "Do you not see me as a man? I've bathed you before. I've seen it all, so perhaps that is why I'm not fazed." Celine erupted into laughter at his remarks. Celine truly wasn't embarrassed. She was sure that Akihiko wouldn't lay a finger on her. Celine wasn't actually naked either, for a piece of cloth covered her breasts and lower area. For her, the situation was equivalent to two modern-day people entering a jacuzzi with swimsuits. However, she began to feel uncomfortable simply because he made it seem weird. They awkwardly sat in the water for some time, until Akihiko finally broke the silence. "Can you talk about our memories together?" he asked. "No," she replied immediately. She didn't want to waste her time telling a forgotten story that he would never remember. There was no point in going down memory lane. "Can I ask you a question?" Then he persisted. "What is it?" "Did we sleep together? Am I a virgin?" She almost laughed at the absurd questions he posed. "I was engaged to the Crown Prince. We did no such things and we were close like siblings." She paused to ponder once more. "I do not know whether you are a virgin though, Your Majesty." "What a pity. I must have been a loser." The Emperor scorned himself for probably being a prude and acting like a child to her. As he was lost in thought, Celine suddenly asked a question. "Did you know the Crown Prince professed his love to me the day before he showered me with arrows?" He turned to give her a confused look and froze. Celine was a couple of inches away from him, and her eyes bore into his. Her rosy cheeks and lips made her appear innocent, and this combination paired with her wet hair provoked his senses. He felt a rush of excitement as his heart pounded like a beast in a cage. "Why would he leave you if he loved you?" he spoke slowly. "You will know if you regain your memories, Your Highness." Celine smiled slyly, further plunging his heart into a chaotic mess. "It is annoying to talk to someone who can't remember me, especially since you're greatly indebted to me." "Is it because you loved me?" Celine blinked. "You were the closest person to me." Akihiko trembled inwardly, but he took a step forward and closed the distance between them. He wanted to grab her beautiful cheeks and swallow her mouth, reaching every part of her body until his desire was satiated. "Will you be my wife?" Celine blinked again, surprised by the sudden question. "No." "As an emperor, you are mine. You won't be refusing me if I asked again." "Just know that," he breathed softly. His soft tone didn't suit his words, which made Celine smirk in amusement. "Are you threatening me, Your Majesty?" He stared at her intently, his expression turning blank. "I just need you. I know I can't force you, but I can't let go of you either." His gaze softened, and Celine felt tremendously uncomfortable. "Well, Your Majesty, I do believe that you have grown over the past few years. I am proud of your personal growth, and you have truly cultivated your knowledge and skills. That is all I have to say. Enjoy your bath, Your Highness, I will be leaving first." Celine bowed her head slightly and confidently left the tub, not knowing how seductive she appeared to the emperor, who gulped and looked away. Chapter 67. Little did Celine know that days after the bathing incident, Akihiko and Red would collapse, sending the entire palace into a frenzy. A few days after the collapse, a letter returned, signaling Xavia's death and the initiating cry for war. As the Christian court began to panic, Akihiko and Red writhed in pain with an overwhelming headache pounding against their brain. Every so often, Akihiko received visions of his past, and soon he realized he was regaining his memories. He groaned in pain again as he remembered the moments before his memory was stripped away. Xavia stood over his trembling body and smiled brightly. "Don't worry, I can't take away all of your memories because that'll be no fun. It'll come back eventually, when she's dead. How tragic would it be to kill her and then remember her?" He shivered uncontrollably, overwhelmed with shock. He felt the healers and officials in his chambers, yet he was already entering a parallel world. His head felt like it was going to explode from all the memories he gradually recovered. Even Red roared, for their minds were connected as one. Celine, his voice murmured as a million flashbacks hit him all at once. Her smile under the cherry blossoms as a child, her angel-like appearance when she walked into a shabby room for the first time. The nights curled up in her room as he watched her dazzling form. The way his heart pounded uncontrollably as she swept him away from the burning forest of monsters. He had watched her grow into the most perfect woman he had ever seen, her figure shimmering under the moon as she fastened a sword on his heart. The night bazaar, his boiling heart as she danced with the crown prince. The dirty looks other people had given him, while Celine had always covered his ears as if he would be hurt by their words. "You are very beautiful," Prince Xaden. She had educated him, found him tutors and sword trainers. She had been the only light in this world, and the untouchable angel had slowly become the woman Xaden desired. How could he possibly look at another woman when there was Celine? However, the past wasn't over. He received another set of memories that were similar yet completely different from what had truly happened. The visions didn't seem real, yet he clearly felt the same heavy emotions and the heart-wrenching pain. After he regained his memories, he regained the memories of his past life, all because it was connected to his current life. Xaden's eyebrows furrowed in pain and confusion before he passed out. Akihiko, Celine cried as she clung to the emperor who was sweating profusely in his sleep. Celine wiped the emperor's entire face again, shocked at how fragile and vulnerable the emperor appeared to be. He was ghostly pale, and she was afraid Xavier had somehow cursed him from a different country. She had been by his side for many days now, refusing to rest as she closely observed and took care of Akihiko. Celine couldn't help but feel extremely anxious and worried. She felt restless, and the thought of Akihiko disappearing from the world suddenly made her nauseous and heavy. Even when she had left Xaden a few years ago, she had secretly suffered from many sleepless nights. She constantly worried for Xaden, yet she refused to accept such a weakness. She ran away from whatever emotions she felt for him, whether it was a family love or something more. She didn't want to think about such a life, and especially didn't want to love during this time period where happiness was never guaranteed. However, the world seemed to be crashing down and she couldn't avoid her emotions forever. It's because Xavier has passed. Whatever curses she placed were released, so he is only suffering from the repercussions. The Xayanat Emperor also seems to have collapsed. They will recover soon, Your Grace. Sir Vigos reassured Celine, although he was also worried for his dear friend. "Why is he suffering so much?" Celine whispered, patting the emperor's forehead again. Panic was written all over Celine's expression, which she rarely revealed. She felt as if Akihiko was slipping away from her grasp, and the sudden thought of his death made her heart stop again with dread. It was as if her heart was breaking all over again, and Celine could barely breathe. She desperately wanted him to live. "Wake up, Akihiko," Xaden, Celine whispered in frustration. She urged, "You can't just leave like this. Not you. You still have to suffer for not remembering me." Chapter 68. Their story. Kaylina and Xaden were destined to fall in love. From the beginning, Kaylina was a curious child. She did not look like a Zionite, and she always felt as if she didn't belong in this world. She had been abandoned by her father, yet the light in her did not diminish. When Crown Prince Leith told her about his newborn brother from a Christian concubine, she felt a sudden urge to meet the second prince. When Leith was forced to leave for war, Kaylina set out to search for the second prince to alleviate her loneliness. When she found him in the abandoned palace, young Kaylina found his unique features to be breathtaking. If the crown prince was the sun of the empire and the second prince was a moon who guarded the night, then she was the star who helped the moon shine brighter. She was immediately drawn to Xaden as she slowly intertwined their fates. Kaylina reached her hand out and protected him from harm. When he was sick, she cared for him. When he was wounded, she treated his injuries. Using their familiars, they saved one another multiple times. However, they were both uneducated and Kaylina wasn't aware of her familiar's ability to morph into other beings, and so Draco was never cultivated to his full potential. Xaden's power was also built on the foundation of hatred, for his father's cruel abandonment in the dangerous forest changed him greatly. Kaylina herself snuck out to retrieve Xaden, saving him from a terrible fate. That night, Xaden slowly transitioned into a cruel, twisted human, although he was still the sweet young boy Celine first knew him as. This was because Xaden was indebted to her. She also gave life to the late concubine's garden, and it became their safe haven. The garden welcomed her, and Prince Xaden knew that his mother would also welcome this woman. Without realizing it, he had fallen madly in love with a beautiful soul that embraced his broken self. They continued to grow an inseparable bond, protecting one another from the Emperor. Their story was sweet and filled with the most gentle yet fervent emotions. Their story was like a lit candle in a tunnel of infinite darkness. And just like a candle, their love was bound to diminish. One stormy night, Kaylina was taken to the Emperor's chambers. In this life, Kaylina was an unlucky woman who couldn't save herself from the Emperor's sexual advances as he tore her apart. She was bedridden for many months, and the second prince was powerless to avenge her. He wanted to run away with her to his mother country, take her away from his own father. Many nights were spent where Kaylina woke up crying in agony, and Prince Xaden could only embrace her crumbled form. However, cruel events continued to unfold. The crown prince had returned from war with a concubine, and Kaylina begged him to make Xavier empress, and allow her to marry Xaden, so they could leave the palace. Strangely enough, the crown prince refused. In truth, the crown prince loved Kaylina but brought home a concubine, so he wouldn't be the pathetic emperor who lost a beautiful woman. Filled with envy and insidious thoughts, Xavier planned for Kaylina's brutal end. She twisted the minds of many women and planted jealousy into their hearts. However, Kaylina had already planned to abandon her title and flee the country with Prince Xaden. She did not think that Xavier would alter Xaden's memories too. The person who had always been by his side was now Xavier. Even Red had forgotten Kaylina. Kaylina waited for Xaden on the balcony the following morning. He was cold and didn't recognize her, refusing to run away. Shocked, she was heartbroken as she watched the second prince devote himself to Xavier. She quickly ran to confront the concubine, but Xaden imprisoned Kaylina in the abandoned palace where she had first met him. She could never come to terms with this new change. She blamed Xavier and persisted to convince Xaden, who fatally stabbed her in annoyance. Kaylina gasped and spit out blood, tears streaming down her cheeks as she reached out for him. He kicked her hand away and left her alone in the dirty room. Still, Kaylina remained steadfast, filled with hope that her man would eventually return and save her. She succumbed to her injuries many days later after painfully struggling to remain alive. She waited for the second prince until she took her final breath, calling for the boy who had loved her more than words could ever explain. Fate was cruel, and the only way to unravel Xavier's curse was through Kaylina or her own death. The second prince curse was released as soon as Kaylina passed, and it was already too late. It took him only a moment to realize what he had done, and he rushed to the remote room, where Kaylina's injury had turned into a hideous color. One would never believe that such a fragile human held out for so long after receiving such injuries. He slumped down on the floor, staring at her cold body in horror. No, Celine. He lost strength, but he continued to crawl his way towards her. Every step broke his heart into a million pieces as he came closer to the woman who had only smiled for him. His savior, his lover, his everything was gone. And it was all because of him. What have I done? He couldn't possibly live without her. She had left the world thinking he didn't love her. She died a cruel, lonely death, killed by the one she saved. Thus his agonies began. His grief had twisted into evil hatred. His world was black. He wanted to kill Xavia and Leith. But he hated himself the most, for he ultimately caused her the greatest pain. The world slowly began to burn, and a revolution began. Xavia revealed her true form as a demon. No one knew how the demon had possessed a woman's body or blended seamlessly into the society, yet she killed the emperor and crown prince. Although the second prince was powerful, he was driven by hate and grief. He could not possibly defeat a demon who embodied hate and sin. She wanted his dragon as her own pet and kept Xaden on the brink of death until she could find a way to sever their ties as a familiar and master. However, a dragon was more powerful than any other familiar. It could grant wishes at the cost of the dragon's life. Red was aware of the imminent danger and granted Xaden one wish. The second prince didn't wish for strength to kill Xavia or save the world. He wanted to watch the world burn until the end. He only wished to see Kaelina one last time as he slowly drifted in and out of consciousness from Xavia's torture. Both the second prince and his familiar were dying, and the second prince relayed his wish. How would Red grant the wish? Xaden wondered. His mother had believed in reincarnation, yet he was uncertain whether the universe would allow him to meet his love again. Would Xaden and Celine meet in another life? Would she recognize him? Would she forgive his sins? Maybe in another parallel universe, we will be together. He felt the last of his tears trickle down his cheeks as he took his final breath while Red cried for his master. An explanation to what happened after their death. Enraged to find the dead bodies of a man and his familiar dragon, Xavia realized that she had missed an important detail that had flawed her research. She had failed to gain the dragon's power, and the demon's greed was insidious and not merciful. The world was entirely engulfed by the demon's rage and Red's eternal flame. It was the end of the world, and not a single being was spared. Red did not know that Kaelina had already reincarnated into a different universe, and that the wish would cause an unplanned death and pull her back to their world with her past memories still intact. However, the creators saw that the world would end without their intervention, and that evil would destroy this universe. Therefore, time was reversed and a second chance was given for Kaelina to go back in time and change the course of history. Chapter 69. It had been a couple of days since the Emperor had woken up from his coma. Celine was playing with Sir Vigo's child while chatting aimlessly away. Ever since Sir Vigos had brought Habibti to the palace, Celine's mood had lifted tremendously. The child greatly resembled Yasna, which brought a smile to Celine's grim expression at the uncanny appearance. She felt lighter, especially since the Emperor had woken up again. His collapse had shaken Celine more than she thought it would. The mere thought of his death scared her, and her heart seemed to twist in a way that was unfamiliar to her, even though he wouldn't have died. She was sure that her mind had already differentiated Xaden and Akihiko as two different people. One lived in her past memories while the other was almost a blank slate, a stranger to her. So why was her heart even more shaken? Why was she so nervous? She had felt an overwhelming sense of relief when the Emperor had opened his eyes, yet the emotions were replaced by embarrassment soon after. For the first time, her cheeks were stained red as she realized everyone had seen her devotion to the Emperor as she clung to his bedside for many days and sleepless nights. It was only logical for Celine to run away. Celine couldn't bring herself to look anyone in the eye, so she spent the days with Habibti instead and hid from the Emperor. As if on cue, Akihiko barged into the room, making everyone jump in surprise. When Kaelina quickly set down the surprised child to greet the Emperor, he nearly ran to embrace her, and Kaelina's eyes widened. It's been so long, Kaelina, the Emperor breathed into her neck, tickling her entire body. Celine felt goosebumps run down her back as she shivered. The way he called her name was hauntingly sad and filled with unspeakable sorrow. She forgot about her own embarrassment and smiled warmly. I hope you are feeling better, Your Majesty. We were all worried for you. She gave him her brightest smile, for Celine genuinely missed the Emperor. She had wanted to see him, yet her embarrassment kept her from visiting. Did you regain your memories? She slowly asked. After hearing no response from him, Celine trembled. So it's true. Her spell was broken after her death. There was no more power to uphold the curse, he explained. No one would know how much pain and suffering the following words entailed as he held her for a long time. He pulled her into his arms even more, desperately clinging to her and burying his face into the nape of her neck. There was no sign that he would let go anytime soon, and Celine didn't push him away because she felt her shoulder dampen from tears. She wrapped her arms around him in return and gently patted his back, understanding how overwhelmed he must feel. His next few words shocked her to the depths of her soul as he momentarily pulled her away to speak. His eyes were filled with years of longing, a look that Celine was not familiar with. From now on, I am only looking at you, Akihiko promised softly, inching his face closer to hers. The familiar scent of roses covered his nose and he smiled with warmth. She had always smelled like roses to him. He had been yearning for this scent for far too long. Even when I didn't remember you and our memories had been lost, I was still drawn to you. I know I am fated to fall in love with you over and over again. You should know I will always make my way back and return to you. He knelt to one knee, which prompted Sir Vigos to hold onto Habibi and slowly exit the room. Celine barely noticed, for she froze at his humble appearance. He was slightly disheveled as if he had just woken up. His normally clean and swept-back hair was now messy, yet his beauty still shined brilliantly. She was amazed by an action that was unbefitting for an emperor who was kneeling before her. I am sorry for making you wait, Kilina. I'm sorry for not protecting you well, I'm really sorry. Tears unknowingly trickled down her cheeks as she heard the intensity of his sincerity in those words. Celine knew he was apologizing for not remembering their precious memories, yet the promise felt deeper, and the words sounded as if the apology was 100 years in the making. The bitter emotions and injustice Celine hid over the years were unraveled at once by his words, and she couldn't keep the tears from falling. Since her husband's death, he was the first person to make her shed genuine tears that didn't numb her heart. She was surprised by his words, but his confession was hauntingly beautiful. Akihiko wiped the tears away with his thumb as his heart ached. Wouldn't my love truly be impenetrable since I ended up falling in love with you even after losing my memories? It would be like fate. He smiled at her with the deepest affection, and she immediately knew what kind of love he had for her. Her face hardened, yet the emperor's expression remained unfazed. He wanted to caress her, yet he decided to keep kneeling to prove his sincerity and devotion. He was also shaking nervously, and it was so noticeable that Celine also became anxious. You're making everything sound too romantic right now. I know you must be overwhelmed from all those memories you received, so don't rush your words and rest some more, Your Majesty. She pushed him away lightly, disregarding his feelings as a fleeting moment of weakness. In truth, she was at a loss for words, shocked that Xaden had come back to her and that their memories were aligned once again. She had so much to say, yet her tears kept falling and the words couldn't be organized into normal sentences. Her hands trembled, not knowing how to react or stop the rush of emotions coursing through her. It was all you. You gave me confidence and helped me grow as a person. When everyone believed that I was unworthy and ugly, you looked at me as if I was the most special being in this world. You are the greatest blessing for me. How can you expect me not to love you? How can you deny that I love you? The emperor refused to leave and intensely stared at the iridescent colors within her eyes as if in a trance. He felt as if he was dreaming, and that Celine was an angel who had returned just for him. Celine wasn't sure how to handle or respond to his emotions, yet one fact she knew for sure was that his words melted her heart. The sweet words were like honey to Celine's ears as she widened her eyes. It was as if the man before her was someone who was deeply connected with her entire being, and she felt her body screaming to get closer to the emperor. A faint blush began to form on the apples of her cheeks like a rose in bloom. They stared at each other for a long time, standing in comfortable silence and admiring one another's presence. The emperor had many words to say, yet he also kept silent and just appreciated her existence, making silent promises that she would always be safe and happy from now on. Celine would forever remember this particular day, where she felt a strong force stirring within herself. It was drawing itself towards the emperor, and Celine had no choice but to stay frozen in time. She spent the rest of the day reminiscing about the past with Akihiko, and the cherished memories were eagerly exchanged, entangling their fates together once more. Chapter 70. The following day, the Christian Council held a meeting to discuss and finalize plans for the war. However, the meeting was certainly strange to all of the officials. First, Celine had walked into the court and was officially introduced to the public eye. She didn't feel the need to hide her appearance as she confidently strode into the room, filled with court officials. The court was immediately enraptured by her unique appearance, shocked that the veiled, mysterious woman was far more beautiful than they had ever imagined. They were completely taken away by her colored eyes and silvery hair, mouths wide open, as if she was not a human but a fairy. Her looks were the complete opposite of the standard Christian woman, yet she had easily captured everyone's attention. They were stunned by her unearthly beauty, almost convinced that they were in the presence of a goddess. The men were especially surprised to witness the emperor peering over at Lady Celine with a soft glance. They could understand why the emperor had rejected the most beautiful woman in Xianxia as they quietly observed the spectacle before them. Emperor Akihiko smiled a smile filled with years of love and longing. His gaze softened in Celine's presence, and he appeared much more youthful. The court officials were stunned into silence. Celine tried her best to remain expressionless and ignore the obvious stares from the same men she had been planning for months. The eyes of the partners who she had guided and gained the respect of turned from admiration into amazement. They were blushing at the realization that she had stood close to them before. However, the emperor made a shocking announcement that destroyed any attempt of Celine's goal to enjoy a peaceful life. In terms of trading, agriculture, and improving the country's efficiency with such genius technology, Lady Celine and her family have brought wealth and prosperity to my reign that will last for many years. She is worshipped and admired by the people, a symbol of good fortune for this empire. She is surrounded by auspicious power, and she is also a symbol of strength to my people. Therefore, I appoint Lady Celine as an empress candidate. She has proved herself to be the only woman worthy of the title, and I will be courting her. Celine's jaw nearly dropped to the floor in shock, and she was sure that her gasp was the loudest in the entire courtroom. Unrest and the sound of suppressed coughs filled the air as nobles whispered amongst themselves. They had expected Celine to be the first concubine, and would never have imagined that the emperor would appoint a non-Christian woman as the sole empress. Even Celine was aware of the complications that would occur in the future, and how dangerously proud certain nobles could be of their bloodline. There was a mix between dismay and curiosity, for the situation was slightly more favorable for Celine since the foreign lady possessed a familiar dragon like the emperor. Some believed that the match would further bring prosperity despite the lack of Christian blood in Celine. After dropping the sudden news, the emperor refocused the attention and continued to plan for the war, halting all side conversations. The council had no choice but to move on to the next topic. However, Celine was distracted during the entire meeting, barely retaining any information. She blinked multiple times until finally her eyes narrowed in anger, staring daggers into the emperor who deliberately avoided her gaze. Later, after filling in with all the details she missed from Sir Vigos, she was granted a private audience in his quarters. Your Majesty, why did you publicize such an absurd statement that I did not agree to? Celine marched in, disregarding the formal greetings. So that the court officials will stop pressuring me nor complain about the lack of women in the palace. Plus, I am courting you, so I was just announcing my sincerity, the emperor replied nonchalantly with a victorious smile smeared on his lips. I have no such plans to accept your Majesty's feelings, Celine responded, gritting her teeth. Then you should have continued to hide your appearance. Didn't you know you would receive multiple marriage proposals once you revealed your pretty face? I am only helping you, the emperor shrugged. I would have just rejected them, she grit her teeth. He only smirked, continuing to read through the scrolls in his hands as Celine fumed. Your Majesty, I. Call me Aki. He didn't look up as he continued to read the scrolls. However, Celine was confused by the sudden command. I respectfully refuse, Your Majesty. Celine's commanding tone made the emperor finally look up, and she was stumped by his sorrowful eyes. I want to make this clear. Even if you do someday win me over, I will never be empress. The first never wanted to be involved in politics and court life. Especially as a woman, the responsibilities and flower image I would have to maintain already makes me feel as if I'm suffocating. I have other work and hobbies, yet none of my specialties include social skills. Therefore, I am not suited to be an empress. Celine was aware of the emperor's charm and beauty. She knew she would grow accustomed to Akihiko courting her and eventually view him as a man. Even now she was constantly confused and it deeply scared her. She wanted to put an end to this courtship immediately, and didn't want to live her life worrying about trivial, materialistic matters when she could help the country prosper in her own way. She was a practical woman who knew her own strengths and weaknesses. She knew the seat of the Empress didn't belong to her anyways. Skills can always be developed and improved over time. You yourself taught me this lesson, the Emperor responded, his eyes firmly resting on hers and observing every emotion flickering across her face. I don't want you to be an empress just to take care of palace affairs. I am also just a man who wants a beautiful woman as his own. Life doesn't need to be so complicated like the way you just described it. That is, if I do love you, she countered. If you stop loving me, then I'll just have you love me again. Stopped. But I don't recall saying that I loved you. You did. I didn't. You wouldn't remember the past like I do. Celine felt annoyed at such an absurd remark. She narrowed her eyes at the seemingly pitiful man who had tried to kill her many months ago because he didn't recognize her. You are quite different now. You have gained many skills. I wonder how you gained such knowledge. Celine felt as if Akihiko was rambling on, and she couldn't keep up with the meaning behind his words. But the Emperor only continued, but for now I am the most competent and beautiful man you will meet. Surely you will love me again. She laughed. But Your Majesty, there is no other woman like me either, therefore the pursuit may not be easy. The Emperor's eyes flashed, but they were interrupted by Sir Vigo's cough. He had been standing in the room for some time, waiting for the opportunity to pass along his urgent news. Celine nodded in the advisor's direction and bid farewell. Please reconsider your proposal, Your Majesty. I am not worthy to be Empress of Krastia. As she left the Emperor's private chambers, the Emperor's eyes immediately darkened and the air turned noticeably gloomy. Your Majesty, please give her time. She has never been loved by a man. The incident with the late Xianxia Emperor would have probably scarred her from getting close to another man. With patience, you will win her heart. Sir Vigos bowed. The Emperor smiled sadly. Yes, I am grateful that the bastard did not touch her this time around. His words seemed to be dipped in ice as he recalled the pathetic man who he never considered as father. I'm here, and I am stronger now. I will wait for her for however long it takes. There is no one who will love her more than me. Sir Vigos was rather disturbed by Akihiko's remarks, yet he quickly changed the topic and ignored what he said. Your Majesty, my close connections within the Xianxia Empire has confirmed that Xavier has survived the poison. He spoke gravely. I am not sure how that is possible. To this day, there is no such antidote that could have healed her. However, they have seen her with their own eyes. She is truly alive. How did you predict this, Your Majesty? Demons can't die, the Emperor murmured, deep in thought. The Emperor knew Xavier wouldn't die from a common enemy tactic. However, she had passed away for a moment, for the Emperor remembered that only her or Celine's death could unravel his curse. Yet he also knew that Xavier wasn't human, and that it was possible for her to survive. I want to keep this a secret for now. The Xianxia Empress shouldn't be underestimated, and I need you to investigate how to seal a soul. Sir Vigos widened his eyes as the Emperor spoke words that had been forbidden since the first Emperor's reign. Chapter 71. A celebration was held in place for the success of Xavier's assassination attempt and Emperor Akihiko's speedy recovery. As the Emperor remained seated at the highest altar, he overlooked the festivities of noble men and women chatting away within their seats as traditional performances were held throughout the night. Celine, who also sat amongst the nobles, was particularly entranced by her surroundings, which was far different from the Xianxia Empire. The traditional music reminded her of her past home, and the bowed string instruments created a peaceful yet formal atmosphere. She mingled with the nobles who were deeply interested in her, and the nobles remained relatively modest compared to the Xianites even when they were drunk. She was swarmed with questions from noble ladies, while men openly stared at her beauty. They didn't dare approach Lady Celine, for they feared the Emperor's wrath. Celine had also decorated herself with colorful fabrics and jade accessories gifted by the Emperor. Her clothes were rather conservative and rich in color, much different from the Xianxia Empire. The deeper colors contrasted with her pale skin, and her silvery hair stood out even more. She felt rather regal and more comfortable with this familiar style of traditional clothes and happily enjoyed many fruitful conversations. Meanwhile, the Emperor scrutinized this scene before him. All he saw were snakes who intricately hid the poison on their tongues with sweet and angelic voices probing for potential mishaps or weaknesses. He was irritated by the bastards who drooled and shamelessly stole glances with his woman. Many performers attempted to gain his attention, yet their seductive eyes were immediately rejected as he could only look at one woman. Suddenly he remembered Celine's words, the only obvious hint that indicated her remembrance of her past life. The atmosphere suddenly became cold and the subjects shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even Celine frowned when she felt the burning stare of the emperor penetrating her skin. She had been happily chatting with the noble ladies and was overjoyed as she realized how popular Akihiko had become in this country. Seeing his popularity amongst women was heartwarming for her since he was finally receiving his well-deserved recognition. Celine always believed that Akihiko's beauty shouldn't go unnoticed and hoped that he would eventually forget the past where he was scorned for his looks. After all, above all things, Celine wished for Akihiko's happy ending. She could imagine reading about his accomplishments and wisdom in the history textbooks. She smiled proudly to herself without realizing the empty space her eyes had drifted off to was the table filled with young, noble men. She didn't realize that the emperor was watching her every move, or that the emperor had suddenly recalled the moment she had revealed a story from her past life. Celine decided to slip away from the celebration because she felt a slight stir in her heart as she came to a disturbing realization. The lack of attention the emperor gave to other women had made her feel somewhat light and happy. She sometimes caught herself gazing at the emperor with wonder, surprised that he would meet her eyes immediately. He was always on her mind and it seemed to be the same for him. It seemed as if the marriage proposal would be a success if Celine didn't do anything now. "I'm crazy," Celine sighed. As Celine prepared to get ready for bed, she heard a dramatic noise outside her balcony. She called for Draco, and instead found Akihiko standing tall underneath the moonlight. It was a quite sudden and surprising visit, yet she didn't immediately kick him out because the second prince had always barged into her chambers in the past. "Did your majesty enjoy the celebration?" She tilted her head forward and walked towards him. The emperor only stiffened, and upon closer inspection, she noticed how frustrated he appeared to be. His eyes darkened and he stared at her grimly. That man emotions clouded his mind as he struggled to find the right words to say. The woman before her wore a nightgown that revealed the curves of her body. His throat became dry at the thought of another man looking at her. "Man. When you were in a coma. When you saved a man who tried to kill you that day." He closed his eyes, unsure if he was prepared to hear the honest answer. Hearing the answer would bring him despair, and dread filled his heart as he waited for a response. He asked quietly, "Do you love him?" "No, of course not," she laughed in embarrassment as she spoke hurriedly. She felt as if she had made the biggest mistake of her life by telling him her life story as she tried to laugh lightly. "I must have been out of my mind by telling such an absurd story. There is no way I would know him since I spent my whole life in the palace. I just knew he was a good man. That's why I saved him. He's also marrying Hala." Celine didn't know why, but she felt the need to emphasize his marriage to Hala. Her excuse sounded far too unrealistic, yet she refused to talk about her past life and end up sounding like a crazy woman. She desperately wished they could switch to a different topic and forget whatever nonsense she had revealed. The emperor watched her turn red in utter silence, and the air turned slightly awkward. He clearly didn't believe her because in the past, Celine had stated that the first person she loved was shorter than her. When Akihiko had seen Zakai, he had been shorter than Celine too. It wasn't a mere coincidence when Celine had told him that story, which further fueled his anger. The only woman he had loved and devoted his life to had been with another man. This meant that he would never be her first in this life. He could barely contain his anger as he took a step closer. "You must have had many men before," he recalled the one teacher she had spent the day with. His eyes turned murderous as he realized Celine had been looking for a lover. "I'm not sure what you are trying to say." His cold voice shook Celine as she raised her eyebrow. Suddenly he pushed her against the wall next to the balcony. He moved even closer until she could clearly see the madness in his eyes. He leaned in as if he would steal a kiss, yet his lips never touched Celine. She was momentarily stumped, staring at him with amazement. However, Celine was the first to recover and aggressively kicked him while Draco forcefully pulled him away. Celine nearly fell to the floor, shocked by his change in attitude and forcefulness. "What's wrong with you? How dare you confess to me and proceed to treat me like that? Is that how you prove your love?" However, the insults died at her lips, for the emperor looked at her with despondency. His eyes were woeful, drooping down like a sad puppy. He looked so pitiful to Celine that she was once again driven speechless by his words. Feeling even more frustrated, Celine stomped the floor at his audacity. "Just leave. I don't want to see you right now." He felt guilty, not wanting to ever come across as aggressive, yet he had been burning with jealousy. Before, he had never worried about other men, so he never experienced such horrid emotions. He sat alone for a long time in defeat, calling out to Celine softly. "My wish had come true, but I lost your love this time. I really lost you completely, and you don't even love me. Will you ever love me in this life?" After the initial shock of her beauty had passed, the people discovered that Celine was previously stripped of her noble status. The men didn't mind this fact because she was still possessed noble blood and had made significant changes within their country, yet the women discriminated against her when she was alone. They had noticed that the emperor and Celine had recently been estranged. He no longer called out for her publicly, and there was an unknown tension lingering in the air when they appeared together. Celine was merely surprised that Draco didn't seem to scare these hate-stricken women when even men stayed away from her. One day, the women blatantly harassed her as she was outside of the main palace. She had been assaulting Celine for a while, yet it wasn't as traumatic as Xavia's snaky ways. "How dare you seduce the emperor with your dirty blood?" The jealous woman was a close friend of Yua, the most beautiful woman of Krastia. "You can never be more than a servant here, so you better know your place. Don't even think about the empress seat." However, the harassment was cut short as Akihiko's personal guard suddenly appeared and took the woman by the throat and cut her tongue. Yua and multiple other women turned pale and fainted at the sight of blood as Celine's eyes only widened. However, they had slandered Krastia's empress candidate, which was punishable by death. Celine frowned and looked away from the scene, unable to stop the emperor's murderous tendencies. She couldn't refute him, yet she felt extreme pity for the woman who would never be able to speak anymore. It was a fitting punishment and more merciful than death, yet Celine felt disgusted. It didn't make her feel better that unnecessary blood was shed. The sight of blood almost made her feel nauseous, so she only walked away from the scene as the entire courtyard heard the agonizing screams of the woman. After this incident, no one dared to lift a finger against Celine. However, much to the emperor's disappointment, Celine kept her distance in public. She knew she didn't belong in court. It was too much for her, and she even returned home during her free time.